Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf nun of Bava Metzia. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Yesterday we introduced a machlokes between. Hold on, just a second. Where is it? There it is. We introduced a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. We introduced, first of all, back up a moment. We introduced a brand new topic that's going to take us through the much of the rest of the chapter, and that is this topic of ona, the law prohibiting both underpaying and overcharging for goods. So according to the Tanakama slash the Rabbanan in our Mishnah, the threshold for ona is 1/6. And we saw, and so as a result, the understanding is if you overcharge or undercharge by more than 1/6, then the deal would be negated. If you undercharge or overcharge by less than 1/6, we assume that the deal is valid and any kind of overcharge or undercharge is waived. Whether that means that it's technically waived, but it's still the wrong thing to do, or whether that's understood as part of business is an interesting machlokes of the poskim that is beyond the scope that we can get into, but it's an interesting thing to note nonetheless. And then, but if you actually charge exactly 1/6 more, so again, classic example, it's worth 6, and either you charge 7 or you get paid 5, then that's where we call it ona. And ona, we say we are going to end up concluding that it's a valid transaction and the difference gets paid back. So if I, in fact, charge you 7 for something that should be worth 6, then I would have to pay you 1 in return. And if I charge you 5 for something that should be cost 6, then you would have to pay me 1 additional unit of whatever it is that we're selling, of whatever currency we're using. Okay, so that's the background. We then had the debate between Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel had the following debate. Rav said, we're going to calculate it based only on what it's actually worth. So as a result, that's why I gave the example of something worth 6 and it was sold for either 5 or 7. The difference is 1 over the actual value, 6. However, Shmuel says no. We also calculate the value based on the amount of money paid. So now if we reverse it and we say that you actually paid me 6, but it turns out that it's worth 5 or 7, then according to Shmuel, we would also reverse the transaction. So that actually creates almost like a window of situations where we would call it I said reverse the transaction. I don't mean reverse. I mean we would make you pay the additional amount. So again, everyone agrees that if you pay me 5 or 7 for something worth 6, then it's a case of ona. Where they disagree is when a person paid 6 for something that was actually worth 5 or 7. So according to Shmuel, if it was actually worth 5 or 7 and you paid 6, it's going to be ona, because as a result, the cheated party would get the dollar. According to Rav, however, if the value was actually worth 5, and then the overcharge was 20%, it was 1/5. 1/5 is greater than 1/6, so it would be a void transaction. On the other hand, if the actual value was 7 and I charged you 6, well, then the seller was paid 1/7 too little. 1/7, of course, is less than 1/6. And so as a result, the transaction is going to be valid. And so the seller is assumed to have waived the difference. So that was the machlokus between Rav and Shmuel. So yesterday we began efforts to try and show that Shmuel is correct, and we continue those efforts now. And indeed conclude those efforts now with a baraisa that's going to support Shmuel. So we are 3 lines up on the bottom of Memtetum Bet, third word from the end of the line. Tanya Kavase de Shmuel. So we have a baraisa that supports Shmuel. So Misha Hutal Alav Yado Al Helyono, the one who was cheated, he's going to have the upper hand. Ketzad Machar Lo Shava Hey Bivav. If you sold something that was worth 5 for 6, so Minisana, who was the one who has been cheated, who's been abused, Lo Kayach, it's the buyer, right? He paid 6 for something that was worth 5. So Yad Lokeach Al Hel Yonah. His hand is on the top. Ratza Omer Tainli Ma'osai. If he wants, he can say, "Give me my money." Oh, Tainli Masha Only Sunny, or give me the amount that you overcharged me, that you defrauded me. So that therefore, so again, what have we seen? What was the example here? It was actually worth 5, and he paid 6, and yet we are calling this a case of Onah. That shows that we also calculate Onah based on the price paid and not solely based on the value. Because if we based it on the value, this would be an overcharge of 20%, and we would have to say that you have to undo it. It's a void transaction. So the fact that we don't say that shows that Shmuel is right. So Machar Lo, and in the other case, if you were to sell it, as we turn to Nun Amud Aleph, Shava Sheish B'chamesh, if you sell something that's worth 6 for 5, so minis Anna, who got cheated? The mocher, the seller got cheated. Yad mocher al helyon. In that situation, the seller would have the upper hand, and he would have the ability to say, Ratza Omer lo tainli mikachi. If he says, give me back my merchandise, or tainli masha onisani, or give me back the amount that you overcharged me. And so, and so, and the point is that we see here in the top Rashi, Shava Sheish B'chamesh, that if it was worth 6 with 5, Shtus Mekach Shava Chamesh B'sheish Shtus Ma'os. Right. So the case of 6 selling something that was worth 6 for 5, that's a case of 1/6 of the value. Shava Chamesh B'sheish, when you sell something that's worth 5 for 6, shtus mos, that's 1/6 of the money. And again, that was the point, is that we're trying to show that we follow Shmuel. And so that is the conclusion. So in this brisa, by the way, I'll note that there's a slightly different understanding than one gave our Mishnah, and two said that the halacha is, because here we said that if it's exactly 1/6, then the person who's cheated has the ability to choose between undoing the deal and just getting paid back. In the end, we're going to see that you only just get paid back. There's no opportunity to undo the deal if the overcharge is exactly a 6. So we'll see that shortly. But let's move on. So ibayalahu. So now we've talked about the amount. We're going to now talk about the time associated with it, because
in
what
this
did our
case, in the previous case, there was the difference was a 1/6, and we said 1/6 is not considered onah, right?
No, 1/6 is the case of onah. Only 1/6 is the case of onah. More than a 6 is a void, and less than a 6 is a case of waiver. Only the case of 1/6 is onah. And the point is do we calculate 1/6 based on the actual value or on the amount paid? And Shmuel, the one that we end up concluding like, at least that's the implication of the Gemara, because we cite a Baraisa that's consistent with him, says you look at both of them. You look at see whether it's either onah according to the value or onah according to the price paid. And the onah is 1/6. So, okay, so now we go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah referenced the debate about what the time was associated with going back on a deal where there's onah, where there's a 1/6 overcharge or undercharge. And the issue is what happened. And then we said if it's more than a 6, it's going to be voided. And if it's less than a 6, it's going to be waived. Now, when we said that, we didn't actually say whether or not there's a time that's associated with each of those things. So, for example, when it's less than a 6 that's been overcharged, does that mean that right away the person has waived the difference? So I charge you 5.5 for something that's worth 6, and now I come into you and I say, listen, I see now that it's actually worth 6 in the marketplace. I want the half. So if I do that immediately, do I get my money, or do we say that no, it's an immediate waiver? After all, remember that if I charged you 5 and it was 6, so then there's some time frame that may be associated with it, or better, if I charge you 7 and it was actually worth 6, and again, and it was actually worth 6, so then you have only, according to our Mishnah, only the amount of time it would take you to show it to your relative or another merchant, and then you'd lose out. So what about if I charge you 6.5? If you show it to your relative or other merchant and come right back to me and say, listen, I was supposed to only pay 6 for this. That's what the market says. So do you have that right to come back to me immediately? Or do we say, no, you don't have it, you immediately waive? That's the question that we're going to ask now. So Ibailahu, Halchos Mishnus L'Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, when it's less than 1/6, La'altar Havya Mechila, do we say that the Mechila is right away? Or do we say that you have an amount of time to show it to a merchant or a relative? And if you tell me you have the amount of time to show it to a relative or a merchant, what's the practical difference between if I charge you, again, 6.5 for something worth 6, or 7 for something worth 6? In both cases, it seems like you can come back and get the difference back. So, Ika, there is a difference. Because if, in fact, I charge you 7 for something that's worth 6, Ratza Choser, Ratza Kona Umaxer, you, as the buyer, get to choose whether you want to undo the deal or Ratza Kona Umaxer or not, or you can choose to get the difference paid back. But when it's less than a 6, kana umaxer ona, then it's definitely a valid transaction. It's just would be the returning of the additional half if I charge you 6.5. So what is it? Do we say that you have any time to undo it or no? So Tashma. So we're going to try to prove it here. We're not going to be successful, but Rashi is going to paskin this issue for us in a little bit. So come in here. When in our Mishnah we said that originally the merchants in Lod were excited about Rabbi Tarfon's ruling because they were able to charge up to even an additional third and not have it be ona. But then when he said that they would have a whole day in order to come back, then they went and said, no, we don't like that. We will go back to the rabbis. So Savrua, what is it that they didn't like? Savrua pachos mishlish l'Rabbi Tarfon ke pachos mishdus l'Rabbanan dami. They thought that they would have that everything under a third would, according to Rabbi Tarfon, would be like under a 6 according to the rabbis. So amra bishlama pachos mishdus l'Rabbanan b'kadeshi yara l'tagar o l'krovo o Rabbi Tarfon kol hayom. So then, if we say that under a third, a 6 according to the rabbis would be treated like under a third according to Rabbi Tarfon. Well, then now if it's under a 6 according to the rabbis, and we give them an amount of time that allows you to show it to the merchant or to a relative, so. And now Rabbi Tarfon gives you the full day. That's why they went back. Because think about it. If I sell you something for 6.5, and it's really worth 6, and now I, instead of giving you like an hour to come back to me and undo it, I now have to give you a whole day. That's terrible. Now, all my transactions every day, because I'm going to try and make a little profit on every transaction, every one of my transactions could come back to haunt me. So, Mishum Haki Chazru. That's why the merchants in Lod said no, thank you to Rabbi Tarfon because they didn't want to give every transaction of theirs essentially extra time. So Ella Amran Pachos Mishtus Rabbanan La'alter Hi Havya Mechila. But if you now tell me that actually the Mechila would be immediate, and so as a result, if I sell something for 6.5, you never have an opportunity to come back to me because we assume you waive the difference immediately. Why would I be unhappy? Why should I be upset about Rabbi Tarfon giving me a day? When does he give me a day? He gives me a day only in the case of Ona, exactly. So everything up to a third, according to this understanding right now, if I charged you if I charged you 7.5, according to Rabbi Tarfon, if I charge you 7.5, that's 1.5 over 6, so that's a 25% overcharge, but that's still less than a third. So that would be a valid transaction. I should be thrilled about Rabbi Tarfon. Who cares that if I actually charge you 8 for something that's worth 6, I'm going to end up losing because in that situation, I have to give you a whole day. I'll just avoid charging you 8 instead of 6. I'll just make sure that I always charge less than a third as a premium because we'll have immediate waiver. So this makes no sense. So Rabbi Tarfon Nami la'alter havya mechila, and we say again that again for Rabbi Tarfon immediately there would be mechila. Amai chazru. Why in the world would the merchants give up that additional profit? So the Rabbi Tarfon, Nikalahu Tvei. It was way better for them under Rabbi Tarfon. Demai de Rabbanan Kamashvu Lahu Ona. Because, again, what did the rabbis call a case of Ona? It was only 1/6. So the Rabbi Tarfon, Havya Mechila. That would be a situation where the Rabbi Tarfon would say that you have waived the difference. And as a result, you can't undo it. And it's immediate according to this. So again, that's the question that we have. So doesn't this show that our Mishnah indicates that it must be that you have time to undo a transaction, even if it's less than a 6 according to the rabbis and less than a third according to Rabbi Tarfon? And the Gemara answers no. Misvarat pachos mishlish l'Rabbi Tarfon kepachos mishtus l'Rabbanan dame. Do you think that it's actually a good comparison that Rabbi Tarfon says that whatever is charged less than a third is exactly equivalent to a situation of charging less than a 6 according to the rabbis? Lo, that's not the case. Mishtus va'ad shlish l'Rabbi Tarfon kishtus atzma l'Rabbanan dame. That no, if you charge anywhere between 1/6 and 1/3, according to Rabbi Tarfon, actually we would say that again, if now we're talking about a situation where the buyer was gypped. So I charge you anywhere between 7 and 8 for something that is worth 6. So that's between 1/6 more and 1/3 more. So if I charge you anywhere in that range, so then we're going to treat it like Ona. And again, in our Mishnah, that means that the purchaser will end up with the right to decide either between going back and undoing the whole deal and voiding the transaction or getting the difference. And so as a result, what do we see in this result? The result is that I'm way better off if I charge you 6.999, right, than if I charge you 7. Because if I charge, or 7.01. So if I charge you 7.01, then you end up, you haven't waived anything, and you end up having to pay me right away. And you end up having the right for me to pay you back the $1.01 that I overcharged you. So I'm way better off if I charge you less than that. So in that situation, well, 1 second. If in fact we're saying that, why in the world were the merchants in Lod happy initially? They didn't really get much because essentially every transaction from 7 to 8 would be treated like a transaction at 7, according to the rabbis. That's not a big deal. So tivshu debito mikach l'rabbanan la'olam choser. So, well, maybe we could prove that according to the rabbis, if you actually overcharged, that you would have forever to recollect. Because what would that mean? Because then, let's say again, I'm overcharging Stan today. So Stan, sorry Stan. So I charge Stan 7.1 for something that's worth 6. Now, according to the rabbis, I have charged more than a sixth more, and so as a result, it's a void transaction. Now, if we say that the rabbis say that you would have forever to come back and say, listen, you gypped me off, well then, of course, it makes sense now why I'm happy with Rabbi Tarfon. Because Rabbi Tarfon would instead say that you have a limited amount of time. Because in the case of Ona, if I charge you only 7 instead of 7.1, the rabbis would say that you only have the amount of time to go show it to a merchant and come back to me. So if tivshos, so why don't we say tivshos debito mekach l'rabbanan la'olam choser? You can actually come back forever. The kaven to amr lahu Rabbi Tarfon havya ona. And now that I say that charging you between 7 and 8 is actually also a case of ona, meaning that you're now time limited, samchu. So now I'm thrilled because yes, it would be bad if I overcharge you more, and you have the right to undo it, but you have a limited amount of time to undo it. Whereas according to the rabbis, you could undo it forever. So, but ki amar lahu kol hayom. But then when he said all of the day, chazru, they went back to isal kadaitach debitul mekach the rabbanan b'kadesh yara latagar olakrova. But my samchu. But 1 second. If in fact you were to say that that the transaction is nullified. Now, if instead of saying that if I charge you 7.1 according to the rabbis, that you would have forever to nullify it, if you only had a limited amount of time to nullify it, why would I be happy associated with that? I'm, what? There's no practical difference between the two cases. So doesn't that show that it must be that you have forever to go back, and that's the explanation? No, it doesn't have to mean that. They could be happy about 1/6 itself. Rabbi Tarfon mechila, because according to Rabbi Tarfon, when does he say that that something is considered ona? It's between 1/6 and a third, and up to and including a third. So this is a great opportunity to use math. If you remember, you probably needed to be in college in order to learn this, right? Open sets versus closed sets. An open set does not include the endpoints. A closed set does include the endpoints. So according to this, it would be open at least at the 1/6 side, because it doesn't include 1/6. So as a result, according to Rabbi Tarfon, they would be very happy because they knew that if in fact they charged exactly 1/6, then it would be an immediate waiver. Whereas the Rabbanan would say, no, that's a case of ona, and you would have the right to either demand a refund or cancel the transaction. So bottom line,
are we saying that?
Let me just say the bottom line. Bottom line is we have not definitively proven whether a customer overcharged less than a 6 has an ability to complain, or whether the difference is assumed to be waived immediately. That's the bottom line of where we've reached. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I'm a little confused here. I thought we were saying that according to Rabbi Tarfon, they have a day to reclaim, to complain.
That is correct.
So if that's the case, and we're by the Rabbanan, we were saying L'alter, there's no time. Basically, he has to make his claim immediately. So why is there an advantage for the seller to use Rabbi Tarfon? He would say, no, I don't want to give him a day to come back and complain.
So two things. One is we're talking about, so that you're confusing two situations, because the situation of La'alter is the waiver if the charge is less than a sixth. And we have assumed so far that the rabbis and Rabbi Tarfon agree with respect to anything that the overcharge is less than a sixth. And indeed, that's how we conclude that when it comes to an overcharge of less than a sixth, they are in complete agreement. That is not the area of disagreement. The area of disagreement is only is at exactly a sixth, according to the end of our Gemara, where Rabbi Tarfon would say that it's a situation of waiver. You can't undo the deal. And the rabbis would say, no, it's a situation of onah. You can undo the deal. And according to, and then also they differ between 1/6 and up to and including 1/3, where according to Rabbi Tarfon, you have the cheated party has the right to either undo the deal or get paid back. And according to the rabbis, you only have the right to undo the deal. So that's the difference between Rabbi Tarfon and the rabbis. And then the question is, but in terms of time frame, it is only between 1/6 and 1/3 that Rabbi Tarfon would say, and possibly even more, but only between them that it would be the difference between him and the rabbis in terms of when you can complain. How long do you have to complain? And so what they originally were happy about was the fact that they would get the opportunity to overcharge by a sixth, but then they were unhappy because then from everything from a sixth to a third, it would end up being that the buyer would have a longer time to undo it than they would have under Rabbi Tarfon. So as a result, under the rabbis, and so as a result, that's why they were unhappy about it.
It's a longer time period with Rabbi Tarfon. They have right?
That's why they're unhappy. That's why they went back and decided to go follow the rabbis.
So why were they initially happy with Rabbi Tarfon?
They were initially happy with Rabbi Tarfon because he gave them the ability to charge a sixth and have it be waived.
Uh-huh.
Isn't this like rabbi shopping?
Yes, it is absolutely rabbi shopping. And but we actually, on some level, as a global community, we engage in rabbi shopping, meaning the entire Jewish community has the ability to indicate which rabbi we want to go like. And so they have, again, remember that it's the rabbis and Rabbi Tarfon. So we're in an age where they had some more flexibility because the global community followed the rabbis. So the question is what is this local community going to do? Is this local community going to follow its local rabbi in Lod? Or are they going to say, no, we don't like our local rabbi. We're going to go with the global community. And they have that ability. It's sort of like, the classic example associated with it that I can't always think of is Rav Moshe sort of prohibited the usage of timers on Shabbos, but the global Jewish community, and many other rabbis permitted the usage of timers on Shabbos. And so the United States had an opportunity. We could have decided to follow Rav Moshe, and that would be the way that we would paskin, or we could follow the rabbis at large, and we decided to follow the rabbis at large. So as a result, even though on so many issues we really follow Rav Moshe, in this particular situation we wouldn't. So that's the sort of the exam comparison that I think that comes to mind. So we've now concluded that there's no definitive proof as to if I charge Stan 6.5 for something that's worth 6, is the waiver immediate, or does he have a little bit of time to come back to me? So now we're going to ask, well, what if I charge him 7.5? Do we say that he has forever to undo the deal, right? That we say that the halacha is that the deal can be voided, but does Stan have to come back within a certain amount of time, or does he have forever? So now we're going to ask that question. Ibailu, bittul mekach l'rabbanan l'olam chozer, o dilma b'kadeshi yara l'tagar o l'krovo. Do we say that the rabbis would say that you have forever to come back and undo it, or only until you show it to a merchant? And you tell me, well, you only have a certain amount of time. My ika ben shtus liyeser al shtus. What's the difference between if I charge Stan 7 for something worth 6, or if I charge him 7.5? Ika de ilu shtus mishin is ana choser. The ilu yaser al shtus shnean chosrim. No, because the difference is that if, for example, I charge Stan 7.5, then both of us have the ability to to undo the deal. So you don't have if I charge you 7, you have the ability to say, listen, I want the dollar difference, or I want my whole money back. But when I charge you 7.5, not only do you only have the ability to undo the entire transaction, but I also have the ability to undo the entire transaction. So that's the difference. So Mike, how long do you have to undo the transaction? So Tashma, we're going to again use our Mishnah, attempt to use our Mishnah to try and prove the answer. So we said again that the people of Lod, the merchants of Lod, went back to the way that the rabbis did. Now, it makes sense. Why would I go back? Because if in fact you only had a few an hour or two to undo the transaction, and now Rabbi Tarfon tells you that me that I'm going to now have to give you a full day to undo the transaction, you better believe that I'm going to go back to the rabbis. That amrat bittul mekach l'rabbanan l'olam choser amai chazru. But if in fact I have to give you forever to undo it, if I charge you more than 7, well, then why would I go back? Because look at this difference. If I charge you 7.5 according to the rabbis, you have forever to undo it. But if I charge you 7.5 for something worth 6 according to Rabbi Tarfon, you only have 1 day to undo it. So that's way better for me. So Amai Chazru b'de Rabbi Tarfon nicha lahu tfei. It's a better system to come mashvi lahu ona kol hayom, because you would only have 1 day for everything between 1/6 and 1/3 the sulo, and you wouldn't have anything longer. So why? So doesn't that show that it must be that you have forever to come back? So no, not necessarily. Bittul mekach lo shchiach. That actually, when it came to the professional merchants in Lod, they knew how to charge things. They knew that if they could avoid charging between 1/6 and 1/3, and so as a result, they wouldn't have very many void transactions. And so as a result, that's why they would feel that even if in fact we were to say that you would only have a limited amount of time, and even though the amount of time is even though even though the amount of time that you would have according to the rabbis is unlimited, we'll say that they would still prefer the ability to charge. They would still prefer the ability to limit you to come back for only a few hours than to give you a full day. And let me just make sure I got this right. So if
you said that the rabbis would give them the whole forever.
If the rabbis give you forever, right? So
and then they would prefer to go use Rabbi Tarfon, right?
That you would think that they would prefer to use Rabbi Tarfon, but because the number of transactions where people are charged more than 1/6 and less than 1/3, is very unlikely. That's what we're saying. Bittul mekach lo shchiach. It was very uncommon to get away with charging. I guess maybe this is really saying more about the customers in load. It was very uncommon to be able to charge more than a sixth more. So that makes it that what matters more is the amount of time that I have when for the 1/6 situation. That when I'd rather have only a short amount of time for the 1/6 situation than a longer amount of time for the even though I now have to give forever for everything that's over a sixth.
So they would prefer Rabbi Tarfon then. Rabbi Tarfon limits the amount of time, so the seller would prefer Rabbi Tarfon.
The point is that even though the seller, you would think that the seller would prefer Rabbi Tarfon because he's advantageous between 1/6 and 1/3. The point is that because the rabbis are advantageous when it's 1/6 or less, so therefore it's better to go with the rabbis. That's where we end up with.
6. But if it's less than 1/6, the sale is bittul. So there's no
correct. But the question
machila.
is, we haven't concluded the amount of time that's associated with it. And so as a result, it's a
mechila less than 1/6. Right.
Yes, but the mechila may not be la'alter. It may not be right away. It may be that you have some amount of time. And so as a result, the amount of time that the rabbis give is smaller than the amount of time that Rabbi Tarfon gives. And so as a result, they're happier about that situation than they would be about the situation of more than a 6 getting more time, right? So there are two situations. They could charge less than a 6 and the people would have less time, or they could charge more than a 6 and the people would have more time, according to the rabbis versus Rabbi Tarfon. And so they're focused on the less than a 6 situation, and therefore that's why they would prefer the rabbis. Whereas originally our question was focused on the fact that when you charge more than a 6 to a 1/3, it would seem like according to the rabbis, you'd have forever, and according to Rabbi Tarfon, you'd have a set amount of time. So I might have thought that they liked the Rabbi Tarfon better, but when it's under a 6, now Rabbi Tarfon gives them more time. So the question is do they prefer having their customers have less time when it's overcharge is a 6 or less, or do they prefer giving their customers less time when it's an overcharge or a 6 or more? And what the Gemara is answering by saying bittul mekach lo shchiach is saying that the frequency that they are able to charge a 6th or more than the actual value is much less frequent than when they charge a 6 or less as a premium. And so therefore they care more about giving their customers less time when it's a smaller amount. And that's why they went back to the rabbis, because Rabbi Tarfon would give them more time in that situation. So that's the distance. But the key point here, and I just want to make this completely clear, is that in the end, we have said that we have tried to prove the time associated with the initial amount of time, meaning if I charge less than a 6 more to stand, if I charge him a 6.5 for something that's worth 6, does he have any time to undo and get back that half or not? And the answer is we haven't answered that. And then if I charge him 7.5, do we say that he has any time in order to undo it or not? We haven't answered that either. So both of the questions that we've asked, when it comes to the waiver, does it happen immediately or not? We haven't answered. And when it comes to the voiding or not, we haven't answered whether you have a time limit associated with that or whether you can do that forever. So now, Rava,
why don't we just say there are two separate situations? We do this in other cases where if it's less than the 6, this is according to the rabbis, and if it's more than the 6, we follow Rabbi Tarfon. Why do you have to combine them and try to manipulate this so that we follow both everything according to Rabbi Tarf and everything according to the rabbis? You have
No, because
two time points.
no, that's true, but the halakhic system clearly the everybody understands that the halakhic system here is an overall psak. It's not that there is a psak for what happens if it's less than a 6 and a separate psak if there's it's understanding what the threshold is. According to the rabbis, the threshold is 1/6, and according to the rabbi, according to and it has the time frame of being able to show a merchant or a relative, and according to Rabbi Tarfon, it's a third, and it's or the threshold is between a 6 and a third, and the time frame is the full day. So it's those two things are tied together, and so you can't just paskin like one on one issue and the other on the other, because the two issues are tied together. That's one of the things that you effectively learn from our Mishnah. Now, again, it's not to say that the bottom line is that we have tried to use our Mishnah to prove one way or the other with respect to what is the halakha about less than a 6 and what is the halakha about more than a 6. And we have said that our Mishnah does not provide a definitive proof, but Rava is going to help us out. So Amar Rava, Hilchasa, the halacha is Hakos Mishtus Nikna Mecca. If it's less than a 6, it is an acquisition. It's a valid acquisition. And Rashi helps us out. We take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines up in Rashi, in the medium lines of Rashi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up in the medium lines of Rashi. And near the end of the line, it says, Hilchas Apagos Mishtus Nikna Mecca, La'alter, immediately. So as a result, we paskin that the halacha is that if I charge Stan 6.5, he has waived the half immediately. There's no opportunity for him to come back and complain. Yoser al shtus, if I charge him 7.5, so bitol mecca, then it's an immediate, it's a void transaction, and we'll see the time limit associated with that in a moment. Shtus, if I charge him exactly a 6th more, so I charge him 7 for something worth 6. Kana, it's a valid transaction. Umaxer ona, and I have to return to him the dollar that he overpaid. And when it comes to those last two categories, in both those situations, he has a very limited amount of time. He has to come back to me within a certain amount of time. He can show it to a merchant or to his relative, but after that, even if I've overcharged him by more than a 6, it ends up being a valid transaction. And Tanya Kavasi de Rava, we have a brisa that is exactly like Rava. Ona pagos mishtus. If you charge less than a 6, nikna mecca, then it's a valid transaction. Yasser al shtus. If you do more than a 6, batal mecca, then it's a void transaction. Shasus kana umaxer ona. And if it's exactly a 6, it's a valid transaction, but you have to return the difference. So Divrei Rabbi Natan, that's what Rabbi Natan says, and we paskin like Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Omer, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, Yad Moker al Hel Yono, and that actually the seller, and Rashi explains, it has the upper hand. What does it mean? Yad Moker al Hel Yono, Im Nisana Moker, if the seller is the one who got cheated. V'hu adin, Rashi is 1, 2, 3, third to last line in the medium lines of Rashi. Yad moker al hel yona, im nisana moker. That if in fact the moker, the seller, was the one who was cheated, then he will have the upper hand, and he's the only one who can undo it. V'hu adin im nisana lokeach. And similarly, if the buyer was cheated, yad lokeach al hel yona, the buyer would have the upper hand. And that's how we're going to explain on tomorrow's daf. My the shire b'masnisin tani b'braisa, and what's left out of the Mishnah is included in this brisa. Okay, so rotza omerlo tainli mekachi, meaning what does it mean that the person has the upper hand? That if he wants, he can say, "Give me my merchandise back." Oh, tainli masha anisani, or he can say, "Give me the amount of the difference." And now this again goes back to even, it seems like Rabbi Natan, in all of these cases where it's a sixth or more than a sixth, that the amount of time that you have is only the amount of time to show it to a relative. So, okay, so now ad masai mutar lahaxir, how long do you have to return it? So we had the debate whether it's a day or a just amount of time to show it to a merchant or a relative. So Amar of Nachman, lo shana elo lokeach, that here's the statement of Rav Nachman that we saw yesterday, that Rav Nachman says that it's only if you we're talking about only when the buyer is defrauded. Aval mocher la'olam choser, the seller would have forever to undo the deal. And Rashi explains first of the widest lines in Rashi, mocher she'ein biyado, near the end of the line, she'ein biyado malaharos v'limlach. So he doesn't have the item anymore, right? If I'm the one who's cheated, if I sell my item for 4 when it's actually worth 6, and I'm the one who was cheated, well, but I don't own the item any longer. I don't have the ability to show it to somebody. So aino makir ba'ona so I'm not going to recognize that I was cheated ad sheyira talis acheres, until I see some other of the item, for example, a talis kidemosa that's like it. Nimkeres b'dam yikarim, and I see that it gets sold for 6. Now all of a sudden I realize that I sold my talis to stand for 4, but the marketplace is showing 6. So hilkach la'olam koser. Therefore, I have forever to go back. However, imlo nisyakro telesos bin time. But we have to limit it. I only have forever to go back if the price of talesim hasn't gone up. Meaning, if we know that the price of talesim has gone up, then I no longer have the right to go back any longer. So I do have some limit on my ability to come back. So Nema Messiah, let's say that our Mishnah is a proof to Rabbi Nachman that, namely, that only the buyer has a time limit, the seller has no time limit. That's why the merchants, again, of Lod went back and agreed to the rabbis, because it makes sense if you give the sellers forever, as we turn to an aleph and aleph. That's why they went back to the version of the rabbis, because they don't want to give their customers forever. They would rather give their customers a more limited amount of time. But if you tell me that a seller and a buyer have forever, so then my nafka lahumina, why do they care? Just as the rabbis made things better for the buyer, they'll get the advantage if they oversell. So tagre lod lo shchiach deto. So the answer is that actually the merchants in Lod rarely made a mistake. So they would never undercharge. They would always overcharge. And so as a result, they were more concerned about the overcharge situation and giving extra time in that situation than they were about the undercharge situation and getting more time in that situation. And so as a result, we now have sort of the psak. We have again the 3 different categories, and we have the time that's associated with each of them. Again, under a 6, it gets waived immediately. Exactly a 6 or more than a 6, you're going to have to come back within the time frame. And when it's exactly a 6, you can get the difference, but that's it. You don't get to undo the deal. And if it's more than a 6, you get to undo the deal and you don't get the difference. So that is where we end up. And that's, in fact, I believe, how we paskin. And now we're going to get some stories. Oh, I forgot to scroll. My apologies. I forgot to scroll. So here we go. So now.
So is that, according to Rashi, then, that the mocher can always, if he finds that he undersold this for less, he can always go back and find he doesn't have the object. You said he could see another one in the market, but I mean, how far does that go? He goes to the next city, the next town, the next merchant. I mean,
all excellent questions, and I
was going to ask those too, and with a specific example.
I believe that that's exactly where we're going to go, meaning some of the next discussion that we're going to have over the coming days and weeks, I guess really 2 weeks is the end of this parak, but is on the question of how do we make the determination? What is considered the market price? What is considered the fair price of a particular item? Those are the conversations that we're going to have. Right now, we've just set the thresholds. And yes, it does seem that I believe that we poskin like Rav Nachman, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to double check on that. I'll see if I can have the answer for that tomorrow. But that is where we I think yes, I'm pretty sure we poskin like Rav Nachman, and so as a result, you would get forever. But the question is sort of exactly as Ken's question: where does the marketplace get determined? How do you determine what it is? Those are definitely some of the topics that we'll be discussing as we continue our path through this chapter. But in fact, we'll have some stories of specific cases. That's how we, God willing, will begin to mark.
If you look
specific example, gasoline
I'm going to look at gasoline stations.
Yeah.
He's going to talk about okay, go ahead.
Significantly more expensive in Westchester County, and it is incredibly more expensive in much of Manhattan. So much more expensive that it's above the 1/6.
Yeah, and well, look, I think that there is definitely an understanding of geographic markets in the halacha, and certainly you cannot purchase gasoline in Westchester or in New Jersey if your car is in Manhattan. And so as a result, the Manhattan
much
market
less expensive in New Jersey.
Right, and the Manhattan market is very different from the New Jersey market, because it's not as if and then of course there are various laws that would probably prohibit you to try and buy gas in New Jersey and put it in a tank and bring it over to New York. So
here's an even better one.
But if you look at in this gasoline case, if you look at, for instance, Rashi's the last
yes,
the last discussion that we mentioned, then the owner of the gasoline station could say, listen, I charged you $2.50 for gas, but I see my neighbor down the block charge $3.50. When you come back to me, I want the extra dollar.
100%. That is one potential read of that, but the question is if that information was already available at the time of the initial sale, then do we still say that you get to go back? Not completely clear. I mean, maybe you don't get to go back because
and now it's available because of the Gas Buddy app.
Yeah, 100%. It's available because you could walk down the street and see it. So that's the question is, because every gas station is required to show the price of the gas that they charge on a big sign. So that is, the bottom line is that those are exactly some of the issues that make this area of law so complicated, and a number of those issues are issues that we're, God willing, going to be discussing as we go through the Gemara together.
Yeah. So another example, which is contrary to halacha for other reasons, you can save a huge amount of money if you have a diesel car by siphoning the home heating oil from your heating oil tank.
Aha.
It's the same stuff.
Aha.
If you get caught doing that, you'll be getting free room and board in a federal prison.
Really? It's actually a federal crime. I didn't.
Yeah, because you haven't paid the motor fuel tax.
Aha.
But your diesel car will run perfectly well in home heating oil. It is the same stuff.
Okay, good to know.
And it costs about 30% less.
Right. Well, if the difference is only the taxes, then that's obviously a separate issue, because obviously taxes are dina de malchusa dina, and we would say that you have to observe them, and so failing to observe them is not going to be considered. You would not call ona in that situation if somebody is failing to observe the halachot of the taxes. So I don't think that would be a case of ona any longer, even if you might actually save money.
In that case, it would be permitted to buy all your gasoline in Fort Lee. Because
Yes.
the reason that it's less expensive is primarily the taxes are much lower in New Jersey.
Correct. That's exactly right. So, all right. Well, now we've got where we should buy our gases. Wish everybody a wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing, God willing, tomorrow. Be well, everybody. Bye-bye.